So, you've cleared the recent Savage tier, and with the downtime waiting for reset, you're sitting there thinking, what else can I do? Well, because Final Fantasy XIV is such a huge game, there's a whole tons of stuff you can do. You can go back and do relics from older expansions, you can go back to older content like Eureka and Bosja, you can craft, you can gather, you can fish, you can do all sorts of nonsense. However, there's one thing that a certain subset of people are going to be going back to, and is one of those pieces of content that no matter what happens, will always be relevant in some way. Ultimate raids are the peak of difficulty in Final Fantasy XIV, and is also the peak of endgame. Well, that's not true. There's also glamour, but after glamour, there's ultimate raids. However, the two of them kind of go hand in hand, because from ultimates you can get shiny new weapons that you can show off to your friends. Ultimates are the most challenging and the most punishing fights this game has to offer, and for that reason, it seems a bit unapproachable for some people. Not helped by the fact that there are some things that people say that is just factually incorrect. People are given the wrong impression of the content, and are just not having a good time as a result. Well, today, I'm going to help with that. I'm going to give you advice on how to prepare for the content, and actual things you physically need to have, on top of other pieces of advice to have while actually tackling the content. There's a lot to talk about, so grab a drink, or a snack, whatever you want, and let's begin. Here's the first step of preparing for Ultimate. Have you unlocked the fights yet? If the answer is no, then thankfully that's a pretty simple endeavor. You have to defeat the final boss of each respective Savage tier when the fight was released, so it ends up looking like this. To unlock the Unending Coil of Bahamut, you will need to clear Deltascape V4 Savage against X-Death. To unlock the Weapons Refrain, you'll need to defeat Sigmascape V4 Savage against Kefka. To unlock the Epic of Alexander, you'll need to do Eden's Gate Sepulture Savage against Titan. To unlock Dragonsong's Reprise, you'll need to do Asphodelos the 4th Circle Savage against Hesperos. And finally, to unlock the Omega Protocol, you will need to do Abyssos the 8th Circle Savage against Hephaestus. And as a bit of future proofing here, to unlock Futures Rewritten Ultimate, which is set to come out after this video releases at some point, you'll need to defeat Light Heavyweight M4 Savage against Wicked Thunder. Once you've done that, you'll need to talk to the Wandering Minstrel in Kugane to unlock the first 3. To unlock Dragonsong and Omega, you'll need to talk to the Wandering Minstrel in Old Charlian, and to unlock Futures Rewritten, you'll either have to talk to the Minstrel in Tuliolol or the Crystarium. Not entirely sure which one. In terms of doing the older fights, it's very simple. Here's footage of me doing X-Death as a level 100, item level 710 Viper. You can take basically whatever you want to this fight and beat the shit out of him. Kefka is a little harder to solo. You need to do either a tank or a healer because of his 1 HP mechanic, but it is easily doable. You can technically solo Titan, but it is not recommended because it is... it's very specific and requires Dark Knight specifically. If you don't have Dark Knight, then you're kind of fucked. And really, for general unlocking, it's recommended to get a party anyway. Same thing for the Pandaemonium fights. Big Kobe on YouTube actually has guides on how to do both of these fights unsynced. So if you want to see how to do it, because they're a little bit particular, then go check out those videos. Links are in the description. Once you've done that, the next thing you want to do is pick what job you want to play. For the most part, you can pick whatever job you want into any content and do well. There are a couple of question marks in there. For example, Paladin for level 70 and 80 is a little rough because its damage isn't the greatest and Hallowed Ground sucks balls. But for level 90, that job works well. Black Mage at level 70 is also a gigantic question mark because the job feels like ass at any level, and Pictomancer and Summoner exist for level 70. Viper and Reaper at earlier levels are also question marks because their damage isn't the greatest and they don't unlock their job mechanics until later. And then Dark Knight at level 70 is weird because they don't have their main raid-wide tool, whereas every other tank does. However, you can still make all of them work if you are dead set on playing them. So just play them if you want. Next, you'll want to get gear, and gearing is a little simpler asterisk. For the Unending Coil of Bahamut, the Weapons Refrain, and the Epic of Alexander, you can basically just take your current gear and it'll work just fine. This is because of how gear syncing works, which I'm not going to go too depth into, but effectively once you reach a certain item level, both stats will be synced down and you'll be at the maximum stat caps for that level. We've long since passed the point where that happens for these 3 fights, so you can do that and do just fine. There are some exceptions. There are certain pieces for tanks and healers that you'll want to get because direct hit from materia is nice, but otherwise just bring current crafted gear with the correct substats and you'll be fine. For Dragon Song's Reprise and the Omega Protocol, on the other hand, that's a little bit different. They aren't at the point where synced down gear is better, and won't be for a little bit. DSR is technically there because of current Savage Tier best in slot, but it's not going to be easily accessible until 7.2, and the Omega Protocol won't be at that point for a while. So for now, it's just best to get their previous best in slots. For Dragon Song's Reprise, you will need a mix of gear from the Asphodelos Savage Tier, the Augmented Radiance gear which you can get from Hunt currency in Radzet Han, and Lapis Monalis gear from the dungeon. For the Omega Protocol, you'll want gear from the Abysso Savage Raid tier, the Augmented Lunar Envoys gear which you can buy for Tomestones of Poetics in Radzet Han, and Void Moon gear from the Lunar Subterrane dungeon. What actual pieces of gear you'll need depends on the job, and if you want an easy way to look at those best in slot sets, I have a link to the Balanced Discord server where they have those best in slot sets for each job available to look at. In terms of food and potion, that's a simpler endeavor, just bring the one that's current. Whichever food is current for you will be what you bring. Same thing for potions. The grade 2 gem drops is what you'll be using for pretty much all the fights, including Futures Rewritten when that comes out. Once you have all of that, then you're ready to jump in. However, how do you jump in? Let's talk about how you can do that. The first question people ask is, what fight should I do first? Obviously not Futures Rewritten, because that's going to be brand new and nobody's going to know what to do for a while. And personally, I would not recommend Dragon Song's Reprise or the Omega Protocol as your first. Those fights are a step up from the rest, and I would not recommend that as your first. As for the other 3, the one that people typically recommend as first is the Weapons Refrain. That fight is considered the easiest of the ultimates, especially since, unlike the rest of the fights, the first half of the fight is not particularly difficult in comparison to the second half of the fight. The second half is where things really heat up. However, you can do the Unending Coil of Bahamut or the Epic of Alexander as your first if you so choose. There's really no harm in doing so. Once you've decided on that, then you're gonna have to figure out how you're gonna go in. There are 2 ways for you to go into these fights. The first and most obvious one is a static. Statics are a group of people who come together every few days for a few hours a day to prog a fight. You'll typically all be communicating through voice calls on Discord and chatting and hanging out. There are 3 different types of statics that you can join. They have the label of either casual, midcore, or hardcore. Casual is effectively just, we don't care about going super fast, we just want to play the game and hang out and maybe learn some stuff. They go at a much slower pace on average, so if you're someone who either learns slower or wants to just get their feet wet in the content, then a casual static might be a good idea. Conversely, hardcore statics are much more serious. They have much more of a game focus where they're studying the mechanics. They already know what's going to happen, they just need to actually go in and do it. They'll usually be a lot more focused, won't really do much small talk, and will just go in and do everything they can to make as much progress as possible. However, hardcore statics require a very specific mindset, and we'll talk about that later in the mentality section, because oh boy, there's a whole lot to go into with that. But hardcore is typically not recommended unless you're someone who has hardcore experience like this from other games. And then midcore is kind of like a middle ground between the 2. They have a bit more of a hardcore focus, but they're not so hardcore that they are acting like sweaty gamers. They're also somewhat casual to where it'll typically have like small talk and like conversations about stuff, but when things get a bit too off the rails, they'll typically ask for focus. And then there's the labels of like semi-casual, semi-hardcore, where they kind of lean in different directions. It's a little weird. In terms of the benefits of joining a static, you're going to have a very consistent experience more often than not, because you're raiding with the same 7 other people every day that you're going in. So you'll have the same people, they'll have the same experiences, they'll know the mechanics probably, and it'll just be a lot more consistent. Statics can sometimes be prone to drama more often than not. If there's one person in a static that you don't like for X, Y, or Z reason, you're probably going to be stuck with them for a good few weeks until you actually, say something. Additionally, if you're someone who is on the LGBT side like I am, then you're going to want to find a group of people who are actually respectful of that. Finding a static is easy. Finding a good static that you'll want to stick around with is incredibly difficult for this reason. And, well, multiple other reasons. Drama, clashing senses of humor, so many things can go wrong in a static, especially if people you haven't met before. Really, the main way to avoid drama like this are 2 words that should be common, but aren't, in the forms of common sense, which really means just don't be a dick to people. Even if there are people in the static who are learning slower than everybody else, don't be a dick to them. Don't pick them out because they're learning slowly. If they ask for help, then help them. It's really that simple. I could go deeper into the social aspect of statics, but honestly, a lot of it should be self-explanatory, which is just don't be a dick, don't be a bigot, and there you go, simple as. However, if you're someone who doesn't like the idea of joining a static, or you're someone who just likes to prog on your own time, then Party Finder might be for you. In terms of positive things that you can do in Party Finder, it's really just going in whenever you want. There's typically parties in all hours of the day, though there are more active times than others. You can go in, put up a party for a fight and a specific prog point, and then once your party joins, you just go in. And then if it disbands because people are upsetty for what reason or another, then they just leave and you get to deal with other people. More often than not, you're not dealing with the same people. There might be some people who you see in your parties multiple times because they're at similar prog points to you, but typically you'll run into several different people at once, which means that if one person is a gigantic fucking asshole, that means you're free to use the blacklist system and say, goodbye, I don't want to deal with you anymore. However, that leads to the cons of Party Finder, which is that progging in Party Finder can be a gigantic fucking headache. Because you're dealing with a lot more different people on a regular basis, that means the consistency of the players is going to be in flux as well. Sometimes you will find groups that are absolutely fucking cracked, and you make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. Sometimes you'll be on Hello World and never make it past Pantocrator. There are many things that Party Finder is good at, and consistency is not one of them. To be fair, this is common in a lot of other pieces of content. In Savage, it's also a problem, but in Ultimate, it is especially bad. We'll go into this a little bit more in the next section because there are parts in the next section that go hand in hand with why Party Finder is so bad sometimes, but just remember, it's going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to be super inconsistent, and especially if you're in Clear for one territory, you're likely going to be doing several parties in a row before you find the right group of people that get there. But we'll talk more about that later. Regardless of which route you take, what you'll want to do is to, at the bare minimum, do a little bit of research on the fight you're doing. What I mean by this is you're going to want to study the mechanics and the strategies. That way, when you actually go in, you'll semi have an idea of what you're doing. Maybe you'll forget when you first go in, and you'll be like, oh wait, how am I supposed to do this? But after looking back at the studying you did, then you'll remember, and you'll be able to push forward. Typically, the easiest way for people to learn is by looking up videos on YouTube. There are multiple different video guides for each of these fights. However, if you want to see what the North American strats are, if you're in the North American data centers, then you'll want to look at the North American Ultimate Rating Server, or NAUR for short, which is linked in the description. That Discord server has all the different resources for every single fight, including stuff like mitigation for tanks and healers and stuff like that, all in one place. And we'll have all the resources for futures rewritten once those strategies are made. And there you have it. You decided whether you're going to go in Party Finder or Static, and you've looked at mechanics. Now, you're actually in the fight. It's now time to actually learn. And this is where things get significantly more important, because there are many tips I have that will make your prog experience significantly better, specifically for Party Finder, but will also apply to statics as well. Let's get into that, shall we? One of the most challenging things about these fights aren't the fights themselves, but rather your mentality going into it. With that, I'm going to say something that might be controversial to some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. These fights are not easy. Even the Weapons Refrain, which is considered to be the easiest of the ultimate raids, is not an easy fight. The people who tell you that are the people who have more clears of these fights than you have hours in this game. They've cleared it so many times that the entire fight is muscle memory, and they can do it without even looking at the screen half the time. However, we also want to rein it in, because while these fights are not easy, they are also not impossibly difficult fights. You may look at a video and think, what the hell is happening? How do you do that? What is happening? There is a method to the madness that you can learn. You just have to actually learn it and then do it for yourself. This means that you need to go in with the expectation and willingness to die and learn. What I mean by this is when you die to something, something likely went wrong, either by you or somebody else. You need to figure out what that is if you actually saw it, and then lessons will be learned from there. You're also going to sometimes have moments where you make it to a mechanic that you weren't expecting to make it to so soon, and you're like, wait a minute, what the hell? What do I do? And that's when you can look back at the resources you've studied to figure out how to do the mechanic properly. This also means you need to be willing to take criticism if somebody else notices you're doing something wrong. Most of the time, when people tell you that you did something wrong, they're not saying it with malice. Most of the time. They're trying to help you out in case you didn't notice that you did something wrong. So if someone wants to give you criticism and advice on how to help, then be willing to take it. However, if someone's being an asshole about it, then kindly tell them to fuck off. Let's say, for example, you're trying to learn Ultima, and you're dying to Garuda. Maybe because you did something stupid, maybe you did something greedy, or you just zoned out for a second. Don't dwell on stupid mistakes you make, especially in phases that you technically should already know by now. It's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes, even on stuff that you've already learned and have gotten past multiple times. The key to success is if that happens, especially if it's something really dumb that you shouldn't really be doing, just move on. The last thing you want is to make one mistake that snowballs into multiple others. That is the fastest way to get on people's blacklist. Everyone makes mistakes, including people who have done these fights multiple times. Here's actually a thread of mistakes that I made in this DSR clear of mine. Fun fact, if the block didn't proc on this Ogmorn, that likely would have been a party wipe. What this means is even though you may have made a mistake that didn't wipe the group, that doesn't mean you want to make that mistake again. Keep a mental note that that was technically not how you're supposed to do it, and remember that for next time. That way, next time it comes up, you don't make that same mistake again. It's all about the learning process. You need to make those mistakes, know that they're mistakes, and then not do them again. This also extends to stupid mistakes other people make. Even if you're squeaky clean, you're not the only person that's having to prog the fight. There's likely 7 other people in your party that are still learning like you are, and they may also be making stupid mistakes. especially in Party Finder, since Party Finder has a clinical case of skill issue. You have to remember that the other people in your party are real human beings. They're not robots. So if they're making dumb mistakes in older mechanics, then you'll want to be a little bit more patient with them. Unless they're being a toxic asshole. Should they be making those mistakes? Probably not. But there is a chance that, say they're having an off night when they're trying to prog, and they're just not doing well. If a person makes those mistakes and then excuses themselves from the party because they're making said mistakes, don't be mad at them. They didn't know they were going to be playing like shit today. Really, the only time you should be mad at people in Party Finder is if they're being unnecessarily toxic. If that's the case, then the blacklist feature exists for that very purpose. Another thing you'll have to be wary of in Party Finder specifically is the concept of something called prog skipping. Prog skipping is the act of putting up a prog point in the party that is a couple mechanics ahead of where they're actually at. The reason people do this is because they're trying to skip the traps of earlier mechanics. But that means that they're going to be trapping those earlier mechanics as well because they haven't studied. Or they haven't actually done the mechanics themselves to be confident in the prog point that they actually put in the Party Finder. Prog skipping is sometimes a necessary evil only if you've studied the absolute shit out of these mechanics. However, more often than not, I would not recommend doing this. Especially if you plan on going for a clear, you want to be as consistent at the previous mechanics as possible. That way you can actually make it towards the end of the fight on a consistent basis. So if you're someone who skips prog because you're trying to clear the fights faster, then you're not going to be as clean on earlier mechanics, and you're going to make more mistakes and make yourself look like a jackass. The last thing you want to do is make yourself look bad because you're trying to go through the fight fast and don't have the necessary practice. However, once you've practiced the mechanics enough and you're at the point where you can potentially clear, that's when you're going to have to adopt a new mindset. Or rather, an updated mindset based on what you've already had. Before, you wanted to have the willingness to die and learn the mechanics. Now, you need to put on your big boy pants and be as consistent as you can. Consistency is key, always, in every facet of this game. So, when you're going for a clear, you want to maintain that consistency that you've built up throughout your prog, and make sure you stay as focused as possible. This is because at this point, all the pressure is on you, especially if you're putting up a duty complete clear for one in the Party Finder. Everyone else will have cleared, you're the only one who hasn't, so it's on you to make sure that you show that you're ready and perform. This can be insanely stressful, especially once you get to the last parts of the fights, where they're basically massive choke checks. Typically, the last few mechanics of these fights are relatively straightforward compared to the rest of the fight. However, the punishment for failure is incredibly severe, and makes you feel incredibly bad if you die at these points. This is the point where now, more than anything else, you want to maintain the focus. Or, for lack of a better term, lock in. These last few mechanics can be incredibly stressful, and you're likely going to be shaking like crazy, making constant rotational mistakes, and trying to figure out what's going to be happening next. The easiest way I can put this is just go one mechanic at a time. This also works for prog, but especially for clear for ones. Once you get towards the end, just take it one step at a time. Let's take Perfect Alexander for example. His mechanics are relatively straightforward, but have a lot of nuance to them, and requires a whole lot of knowledge for you to actually do them correctly. It may seem incredibly stressful, especially the Trines mechanic at the end, but the key is to just take everything one step at a time. First you have Final Word, do that successfully. Then you have the Spreads and Stacks, do that. Then you have Fate Calibration Alpha, do that. Then the Tank Buster, then Fate Calibration Beta, so on and so forth. Take every mechanic one step at a time. That way you don't overload yourself and panic because, oh no, trines are coming when you're not even there yet. Keep yourself calm at all times. Even if your brain's working a mile a minute, try and slow down. How you actually do it is up to you. Drink water, have some music that is outside the game, whatever you want to do. Anything that keeps you focused and calm is what you'll want in a clear for one scenario. You can save your emotional pop-off for when the screen fades to black and the boss is dead. And if you're at that point, congratulations. Ultimate raids are my favorite content in the game. Even after clearing all of them, I still come back to most of them on a fairly regular basis. The thrill of these fights is something that no other content in Final Fantasy XIV can give me, and is something that I have done for a while now and still enjoy to this day. It's also why I'm looking forward to the new Futures Rewritten Ultimate. However, for newer players, it is a bit of a daunting task, especially if they don't know how to get into the content. So, I'm hoping that this video helps you take that first step and subsequent steps to clearing your first ultimate. The rush of adrenaline you get towards the end of a fight before actually killing the boss and getting your first ultimate clear is something that no other game can provide. No other game has given me the sense of accomplishment that clearing an ultimate has. Even after clearing the weapons refrain as my first, it may have been easier than the rest, but it was still a big moment and a big milestone for me. And that could be the same for you when you eventually get that far. And with that, I thank you for watching. This is a video that I've been wanting to work on for a while because I feel like it is a very important one to have out there. So if this video helps you in any way, shape, or form, then I wish you luck in your future prog, and good luck on your potential clear. After this, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be working on. I may work on guides for some other jobs that I enjoy, but after this, we'll see. We'll see what I can cook up. But anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, good luck.